Welcome to Regulate and Rewire, an anxiety and depression podcast where we discuss the things I wish someone would have taught me earlier in my healing journey. I'm your host, Amanda Armstrong, and I'll be sharing my steps, my missteps, client experiences, and tangible research-based tools to help you regulate your nervous system, rewire your mind, and reclaim your life. Thanks for being here. Now let's dive in. Hey friend, welcome back. Last week, we unpacked a listener's question about whether a big emotional reaction they had after a tough school drop-off with their kid was a step back or a step forward in their healing. And this person had a part two to what they wrote in that I felt deserved its own conversation here. So today we're diving into the second part where she shared this heavy guilt-ridden string of thoughts that surfaced during her panic attack. And so today is all about discussing this complex relationship between a parent's healing journey and their child's emotional well-being. And while this episode will be heavily directed towards parents, I do think that there are concepts in this conversation that would serve anyone. So as a reminder, the second part of what this listener wrote in was, while I was panicking, I kept thinking, I'm a bad mom. I've done this to my son. I have made him anxious because I can't get my ish together. Did I do this to him? She continued on to say, I haven't really thought like that before. Mom guilt, yeah, but not these thoughts that were screaming at me. I want to start this conversation with some compassionate context that our thoughts are not facts, especially when we are in moments of activation or shutdown. Spiraling thoughts in moments of overwhelm are your mind's attempt to make sense of a painful pattern and activation within your nervous system. When we are in an activated stress response, our brain's job is to try to find someone or something to blame, or more primally, what it's doing is to identify the threat, the stressor, the thing that we need to handle so that we can return to homeostasis, to regulation. And as parents, we often blame ourselves. I'm sure a number of you listening right now can resonate with some flavor of those kinds of thoughts on your healing journey. I want to talk for a minute about things we know about anxiety patterns in family. Number one is that anxiety has multiple contributing factors: genetics, environment, lifestyle, experiences. There are elements of anxiety that might be inherited, but what an overwhelming amount of research shows us is that these possible genetic predispositions are not predeterminations. And I think that's important to understand because at least once a week I hear from somebody like, anxiety runs in my family, anxiety runs in my family. And the question we always explore with our one-on-one clients is, what do you mean by that? Or what does that mean for you? Do you think that there is a genetic component to this? Maybe yes, maybe no. How would you know? How would you not? Is it that it was more habitual, learned behaviors? And we're going to talk a lot about this in this conversation to offer some reflection, not only for you, if this is a narrative that is felt true for you in your healing journey, but also as a parent, some reflective questions on what is within or not your control in navigating these anxiety patterns in family. So the good news here is that to some extent, we all have influence over some of these elements for ourselves and our children: lifestyle, experience, environments, relationships. So another thing that we know about anxiety patterns in families is that children naturally co-regulate with their caregivers. Early on in a child's life, they do not have the ability or capacity within their mind-body system to self-regulate. They're dependent upon caregivers, usually parents, to co-regulate. So if you, as a parent, cannot self-regulate, then it will inhibit your child's access to co-regulation. And again, this is from a place of compassion and self-reflection. I really want to invite you to step out of listening to these things through a lens of sourcing for blame. Another thing we know and that I want to reiterate is that your healing positively impacts your children, even if the process is messy, even if they aren't still young. Your healing, creating a more regulated nervous system, impacts everybody around you when they're around you. Are you a co-regulating resource or are you a co-escalating resource? So, quick summary, multiple things contribute to anxiety patterns in families. Your children do need you to be their co-regulating source, especially when they're young. And so if you cannot access self-regulation, it does inhibit your child's access to co-regulation, and that your healing, as messy as it often feels, is going to positively impact your children. So let's talk a little bit more about the connection between a parent and a child's nervous system. Like I already said, a child's developing nervous system is deeply influenced by their environment. And this includes the regulation or dysregulation of the adults around them. So maybe think about it like learning to swim. If you, as a parent, are afraid of water due to your own lived past experiences, when you are around water, your child might pick up on that fear. Even if you're not actively speaking fearfully about water, there are these changes. Your body gets tense, your eyes change, your facial expressions might change. Children pick up on all of these things. The same way, if you as a parent are often critical of yourself or your body, your child will likely pick up that pattern and be a similar way with themselves. And this could be said about 100 of micro concepts, moments in your life, which always leads me back to this question of, are we born with an anxiety gene? Maybe there is research that shows that certain things in our brain or certain genetic components can be tied to increased likelihood of having anxiety. But in my opinion, and based on the aggregated research that I've done over the last decade, your resilience towards and responses to the world around you have much more to do with nurture and experience than some predestined genetic code or nature, which is also what can bring so much hope to a parent. And we see this with our clients in the middle of their healing journey. Maybe you have in some way influenced your kid to be more anxious or nervous about the world. But as you learn to show up differently in the world, to resource yourself in new ways, they also learn that from you too. So using that previous example, let's say you decide you're going to take a swimming lesson. You want to face this fear of water. Your initial attempts are going to feel awkward. You might get overwhelmed. Your child is likely going to see you struggle, but they're also seeing this incredible pattern of watching you face your fear. They are learning that it's okay to be scared of something and brave at the same time. To give a little bit more context for this later conversation, I want to remind you of my favorite working definition for anxiety is that so often it is this overestimation of threat paired with an underestimation of your ability to manage that threat. We overestimate threat for a variety of reasons. We overestimate threat about something because it feels familiar to a past experience that was overwhelming for us. We overestimate threat because we are stuck in an activated state. And so the whole world looks and feels more dangerous than maybe it really is. And we also underestimate our ability for a variety of reasons. Maybe it was because of the way we were treated or spoken to, the level of autonomy we were given in our upbringing, or the support around failure. And I think it's so human to overestimate threat sometimes. Our nervous systems are hardwired to do that to keep us safe. It would rather give us 100 false alarms than risk not giving us an alarm for something that is threatening or damaging. And using both sides of this equation, I think the greatest gift that we can give our kids is the evidence and experience that they have the ability to handle hard things. They'll likely overestimate threat. They're a human living in a human world. But the more often they can look at a big problem and believe and have experience in their capacity to face and handle hard things, the less anxiety they will likely experience. I think there are also a number of physiological contributors to our children's potential emotional well-being that we'll talk about and we'll consider as well. Okay, I've digressed a little bit. Let me bring my thoughts back. And what I want to share right now are some lenses, some questions, an opportunity for us to reflect on things that we might be doing or maybe have done as parents that can contribute to our kids' anxiety. And like I said, please, 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 as I share these things, resist the urge to spiral into more guilt. If some of these things feel familiar to you, if you're listening to this and being like, yep, 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 that's me, I do that. Instead, see if you can listen with a lens of deep, deep compassion for the you that I know has done and is doing the absolute best that they can. Can you listen to this with pride for the you that is listening to a podcast like this to try to parent better, to try to parent more consciously, to better understand the way that your nervous system impacts the development of your kids, to listen through a lens of curiosity for some ideas on what it might look like to step into regulated parenting a little more intentionally. And what might come up for you here is an awareness around patterns you didn't even know could be impacting your kids, or you didn't even see in yourself yet, that you may want to work through with a therapist or a coach. Again, breaking the patterns of anxiety in your family, just 1% at a time. And while the questions that were asked by this listener came in a moment of activation, when our minds often spiral out, but oftentimes the places our mind spirals out to, they're not bad questions. They're just not effective when we're asking them, like, am I a bad mom? Have I done this to my kid? Like, we all know the sensation and how spiraling thoughts feel. But I wonder if we might together here be able to ask these questions from a curious and compassionate place instead of a place of guilt or shame. So what if instead of, I'm a bad mom, I've done this to my son, I've made him anxious because I can't get my ish together, like I did this to him. What if instead we decided to shift this to, I'm a really good mom or parent, whatever applies to you. I'm a really good parent, doing the best that I can, and I am willing to look at my patterns or habits to see if they have or are possibly contributing to my kids' anxiety. So the question now becomes, what is our possible influence on our kids' anxiety? And it makes sense that maybe you haven't asked yourself this question before from a place where you really wanted to get the answer, because it's incredibly confronting. It's a really challenging question. And so what I'm going to do is to present a variety of things to consider, things that we know through research have an impact on emotional well-being and development, especially for kids. I'm also going to present a number of questions that you can come back to and reflect on, maybe journal or take them to therapy or coaching. You ask yourself, please remembering this lens of compassion and curiosity as you do this, a gentleness. I'm a really good parent who's willing to self-confront in a challenging way because I want to do better. I want to do different. And the place I want to start here is to hold a moment for you to reflect on what and subsequently if these are kids who still live in your home, what does their daily lifestyle look like? What are your kids eating for breakfast? How much screen time are they getting? How much time do they spend outside or just sitting down with a book? If your kids are eating high sugar, high processed things for breakfast, then their struggle with focus at school, their emotional outbursts, their increased potentially anxiety, it makes sense. What is happening physiologically when your kid is eating a high sugar cereal and then going to school? Their blood sugar is spiking and then it is crashing. We know there is a direct link with blood sugar spikes or crashes, what I sometimes refer to as riding a blood sugar roller coaster, to emotional regulation and cognitive function and focus. If you have a teenager who is scrolling social media until 9 or 10 p.m., they are likely going to bed dopamine deficient and waking up sleep deprived. Their struggles to focus, their emotional potentially dysregulation makes sense given what goes on physiologically when these things happen. Research tells us that kids need to be outside, moving their body, playing 1 to 3 hours a day. They need to be taking risks, exploring, being curious about the world around them. From a sheer physiological standpoint, when certain things are out of balance, kids' nervous systems should be activated. The basic needs of their biological system are being disrupted based on habits and lifestyle that are so common in modern day life. And as a parent, in my opinion, it is our job to look at the structure of our kids' day and to set up structures or environments or experiences that serve their health to the best that our current circumstances allow. And this is going to look different for everybody. It's going to look different for different kids, different families, different seasons. But this is my invitation for you to be reflective and intentional about what this might look like for your kids, your family, your life, with you leading by example. Regulated living is a family affair, and I think it is one of the most fundamental things that we can offer our children that supports them throughout their life. Can you help them understand their physiology and to set up a life that supports that as you do it for yourself as well? Now, what I want to shift into next are those questions that I mentioned. Some of these questions are going to be tricky. They're going to be challenging. They're going to be confronting. I don't expect this to be a podcast that makes you feel super great. Please listen gently. Maybe you want to write these down or come back to this. And as we go through these questions, remember that you are a good parent who is willing to self-confront to do better. A parent who's just genuinely curious from a neutral place. How might I be contributing to my kids' anxiety? I want to be aware of that so I can figure out what shifts to make to support them better. Maybe you're not a parent at all, and maybe you are continuing to listen to this podcast because you're curious about the ways that maybe your parents showed up and how that pattern has now influenced your anxiety and how you might want to use that information to change these patterns in yourself. So question number 1 that you might want to ask yourself is, do I model anxious behavior? Am I constantly worrying out loud, exhibiting anxious reactions throughout the day in situations? Am I often stressed out? Children learn through observation. So if a parent frequently appears to be stressed or fearful, kids may adopt similar responses to the world around them. Or maybe you want to ask yourself, do I lack my own emotional regulation? Do I often respond to stress with anger or frustration or panic? This can, number 1, contribute to just tension in the household atmosphere, which kids absorb. Kids often struggle to regulate their own emotions if they don't see it modeled by their parents. Are there certain circumstances or certain emotions or certain triggers where we lack our own emotional regulation? If so, how do we get to the heart of that so that we can be more firm anchors? Because our children are going to storm around us, especially when they're young. Another question you might want to reflect on is, am I overprotective? Or to what degree or in what areas or arenas do I feel like I might be overprotective? Do I shield my kids from risk or challenges, disappointment, or failure? Shielding children from risk or failure, while well-intended, can leave them without opportunities to develop problem-solving skills and resilience. And this may unintentionally send the message that they are incapable of handling difficult things. It leaves them lacking an actual toolkit to handle difficult things, or a mindset that the world is overly dangerous. Oh, I can't do all those things. They don't want me to do that. They don't want me to do that. It must be dangerous. Your kids are kids. I'm not perfect at any of this. I want you to know that I have taken each and every one of these questions and spent a considerable amount of time looking at my own patterns with each of them. I have cried, I have sobbed, I have taken it to so many places, friends and professional support, to do this through a compassionate and curious lens. I know I'm asking you to do a hard thing because I have confronted these hard things. But the truth is, with this question of if I'm shielding my kids from risk and challenge and disappointment, our kids, they cannot get good at the things that we don't let them practice. You have to let them practice being disappointed. You have to let them practice failure, anger. And a reframe that has helped me with this lately in parenting my 4-year-old, but I think will likely still apply when he is 14 or 24, is that it's not my job to fix his feelings. My kid gets to be mad, he gets to be angry, he gets to be frustrated, he gets to be sad. But instead, I now look at my job as teaching him how to navigate them, which I can only do if I know how to navigate them myself, at least to some extent. So it's okay for him to be disappointed. Can I help him learn how to move through that now when he's young so that he's better equipped to face disappointment as an adult? It is okay for my son to be angry, but it's not okay for him to hit me or his brother. So how can I teach him that his anger is okay, but his behaviors may not be? And it's tricky, and I'm not sure that I'm doing it right all the time, but I keep trying. And part of that trying is my own deeper healing work. And when it comes to risk taking, while I often have a mother's urge right now to tell him not to climb the tree, the long game that I am playing as my son's parent is that I actually want them to get really, really good at taking risks, at being brave and bold with their lives. When I think about the anxiety equation, again, overestimation of threat paired with an underestimation of ability to manage threat. I want my sons to have high confidence in their ability to handle life's challenges. And in order for them to be able to have that, I have to let them make reasonable risks now. Now, again, my sons are 18 months and 4. Right now, it is also my job to do some of the calculating for them. But the other day, I'll share this example. My neighbor has quite a big magnolia tree, and my son is really interested in climbing trees right now. He asked if he could climb this tree, and my instinct was to tell him no. And then I pulled out this equation and I asked myself, is it possible that I am overestimating the risk or underestimating his ability to handle it? And the truth is, the worst that could happen was that he was going to fall, maybe break an arm. And while I would prefer not to have to deal with that as a parent or for him to have that hard experience, I paused for a moment and I was like, I don't have to underestimate our ability to handle that. We can. We're fortunate enough. We have health insurance. The hospital is just down the road. Like, it would be a broken arm and it would be annoying and frustrated, but we can do this. And I personally felt like the far greater cost than the possibility of a broken arm to micromanaging and helicoptering parenting was that I didn't allow my son to practice risk-taking, to learn to trust himself, to find his own boundaries and limitations with things. When we don't let our kids take risks, when we are constantly monitoring or controlling their decisions, it can prevent them from building independence and confidence. It can contribute to or create anxiety for them about making choices or handling situations on their own. And I think that many of us struggle with this now as adults because the space and support wasn't offered to us when we were kids. So in what ways or in what places are you maybe overprotective or overshielding your kids from risk or hard things? And do you want to change that at all? Another question you might want to ask yourself is, do I have high expectations or do I put high pressure on my kids? And why do I do that? When we focus on achievement over effort, it can lead kids to feel like their worth is tied to performance. And anxiety can often arise from a fear of failure, not meeting parental expectations, especially when success is consistently prioritized over growth or enjoyment or play or leisure or rest. All right, let's do 3 more reflective question and discussions. So something else you might want to ask yourself is, do I invalidate my kids' feelings? In what ways might I be emotionally dismissive or unavailable? Likely, again, we are likely doing this unintentionally. This was a question that I decided I was going to take a really curious detective mindset. And I said, let's assume that I do throughout the day, invalidate my kids' feelings, Let's assume there are moments where I'm emotionally dismissive or emotionally unavailable. I want to find those moments. I want to recognize those moments. And if your kid's old enough, there are ways that you can maybe also ask them questions to get some of this information. And it was really interesting what I learned. But in general, we, in really simple ways, can dismiss a child's worries, saying things like, oh, there's nothing to be upset about. This can, over time, consistently make them feel unheard or misunderstood. This can lead to emotional suppression, which can build or contribute to longer term anxiety. And so just reflecting on how often are we emotionally unavailable because of our own overwhelm, or what for me, when I did my own self exploration around this, because of my freaking phone. For example, the other day I was scrolling while my kids were playing. My son asked me the same question 5 times before my brain processed it enough to respond. And when I did respond, my response was pretty dismissive. And then a few minutes later, he broke down, completely spiraled out over a small thing that wouldn't typically upset him. I think it was that a piece of something he was building just fell over. Typically, he would just pick it up and put it back together. And in reflecting on these interactions or these series of interactions, my kid wasn't mad about the phone blocks falling over. He was upset, I think, because he had made multiple bids for my attention and connection, only to be met with the back of my phone. How often do our kids look up for these micro moments of connection or validation and instead see us on our freaking phones instead of looking them in the eye? When I grew up, and I would assume most of you listening, phones were just phones. They called or they sometimes text. But when my parents got home, they were home. My dad would get so frustrated if somebody would call during dinner time. And I remember thinking oh, there are only certain times that you call people, because we don't call people when they are with family or doing other things. We don't have those same social rules or social constructs around. We are at the beck and call of everybody all of the time. We are at the beck and call of the world within our pocket all of the time. We were not meant to live in this world, and our children were not meant to live in a world where their parents' attention could be so easily diverted elsewhere. My parents' phones weren't at the dinner table. They didn't take them to the bathroom. They didn't have them to scroll on while watching a family movie together or sitting on a park bench while we played. So much more of life, you were just where you were. You were just there. And the deeper I get into motherhood and my self-examination, the more frustrated I am becoming with my attachment to my phone. So if this discussion feels a little bit heated, I want you to know that this is not directed at you. This is more directed at me and what I've observed and the ways that this is pulling me away from these micro moments of connection with my own children. I am addicted to my phone, and you are likely addicted because this form of technology is built to be addicting. And I think acknowledging and getting serious about that is one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and our kids. And I am sure I will have a full episode on this at some point. But for me, a goal right now is, can I focus on being less distracted by technology in my parenting, by phone specifically? And the way that I am doing that, I know if it's there, I'm using it. And so I have done a lot of work around, it's okay for me to miss calls. It's okay for me not to respond immediately. I'm more and more starting to treat my phone almost as if it's a landline. I have a specific place in my room and then another place in my office where my phone is out of reach, out of sight, out of mind, and I leave it there. The way that our answering machine or our phone was like a destination thing that we went to, I am trying to build a habit of having my cell phone be more of a destination object versus something that's always on me all the time. Anyways, I've again majorly tangented. The question was, do I invalidate their feelings? In what ways might I be emotionally dismissive? So the example was saying things like, there's nothing to be upset about. It can make them feel unheard or misunderstood. Because the reality in a moment where you might say something like that is that they are upset and their brains aren't fully developed yet. They don't have enough lived experience yet to know whether they are upset for a logical reason or not. And it doesn't matter in the moment. And in contrast, even with my adult brain, my fully developed adult brain, I can think of twice in the past few weeks where I was big upset over something I logically knew was a small thing. And had my husband had come up to me in that moment and said, "There's nothing to be upset about. Knock it off." Friends, I would spit fire. But here's the thing. Things like that were said to me often as a child by two incredible and well-meaning parents whom I love and have a good relationship with. Really good parents can do and say hurtful things, can perpetuate patterns that they are not aware of. Often as a kid, I can remember being told, "Knock it off. There's nothing to cry about." These are things that I would likely say to my own kids now if I weren't as aware or as committed to my own healing. You are here because you are trying to break patterns. But in order to break them, you have to confront them in you first. And that is uncomfortable, as I'm sure you felt with some of these questions. Okay, two more. Maybe you want to ask yourself or reflect on if there are inconsistent boundaries. When our kids are presented with unpredictable rules or consequences, it can make them feel less certain and less safe. Clear, consistent, and communicated boundaries and also consequences for breaking those boundaries helps kids feel secure. They know what to expect. And we have to follow through with those things that we say. And the last reflective question here is, are my kids overbooked or overexposed to stressful environments? I have shared many a times on this podcast how busy with activities my childhood and into teen and then perpetuated into 20s was. I was in dance at the same time as being in karate and piano and voice lessons and church things and all of it, all of it. There was very little just open-ended, unstructured time. In today's fast-paced world, it is so easy to fall into this trap of filling our kids' schedules with activities and lessons and sports and social commitments, thinking that we are enriching their lives. And if you'll ask my parents, they did all those things because I asked for all of those things. But I think I asked for all of those things because I wasn't used to. I didn't know what to do with myself in unstructured time. And so it was easier to ask for more to fill that than to just be. And while extracurriculars have value, they do. Too much of it, like anything, can come at a cost. Too much can create stress rather than enjoyment. Overbooking leaves our kids little time for unstructured play or rest or just being, which is all essential for emotional and nervous system regulation. Similarly, are they experiencing chronic exposure to stressful environments, frequent adult conflict, high stakes situations, or even sensory overwhelming places? These things can elevate a kid's baseline anxiety. Kids need moments and places of calm and predictability to counterbalance the demands of their day. And what I'm deciding right here on the spot is that I will actually put together a downloadable PDF that you can find in the show notes that lists each of these questions. What I want to just make so very clear is that you are not expected, nor do you need to not do any of these things all of the time. You are human. You are going to have human days. You are going to get stressed, and your kids are going to see that. You are going to have moments where you lack your own emotional regulation, where you respond in anger or frustration. You may even have moments of panic. There might be times where you do shield your kids from risk or challenge, and in hindsight, you might think, "Oh, okay, maybe I didn't need to do that." You're going to have moments where you are dismissive because you're distracted or overwhelmed. And that is allowed, that is okay, that is not damaging or harming your children. The opportunity that I hope I presented here was just to reflect on how often our kids are exposed to any one of these things, a combination of any of these things, because the truth is, as parents, we are the primary influence on our children. And the sobering truth is that yes, the ways that we show up in the world can create or contribute to our children's anxiety. And I think it's important that we're honest about that. I think it's important that we self-examine in this way. And we do the work so that our children don't only see and experience some of the things that we talked about in this podcast, or that isn't the majority of what they experience, that there is balance, that they can see a perfectly human parent navigating a messy human life, but doing it in a way that cultivates resilience, in a way that models repair. And so just allowing your system to settle, that it is not expected nor even needed for you to show up ideally all the time. As we wrap up today, I want to circle back to that mother's question. Those thoughts screaming, did I do this to him? The truth is, anxiety in families, it's not about blame. It's about patterns, and more importantly, about the courage to examine and shift those patterns. Your willingness to look at these questions about boundaries, emotional availability, lifestyle choices, that's not guilt. That's growth. That's breaking cycles. I want to invite you to hold on to the reframe that we started here, that I am a good parent doing the best that I can, and I am willing to look at my patterns or habits to see how I can better support my child's well-being. Your kids don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present, to be learning, to be healing. They are not learning from your perfection. They are learning from your repair, from your resilience, from your willingness to face hard truths and make changes. And to this listener who wrote in and gave me the opportunity to speak on this today and to speak on what we did last week, thank you. And to everybody who's here listening, thank you for being here, for being brave enough to step into this work, to self-confront in this way, to ask yourself these questions. And to bring this together, our 3 takeaways are: number 1, your healing positively impacts your children, even if it's messy. Your efforts to regulate your nervous system matter. Number 2, reflection, not guilt, fosters growth. Ask yourself compassionate questions about your patterns and habits. This can help you identify ways to better support your child's well-being without spiraling into shame. And if you cannot do this alone, find a coach, find a therapist, find somebody who can support you in staying in that curious, self-examining place. And so as you reflect on today's conversation, maybe choose just one question, one idea, one tiny shift to start with. And number 3 is that regulated living is a family affair. Setting intentional structures for nutrition, screen time, outdoor play, and emotional connection benefits you and your children's nervous system, which can make them more resilient to things like anxiety and depression. All right, friends, that's it today. I am sending so much hope and healing to you and your families. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Regulate and Rewire podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review to help us get these powerful tools out to even more people who need them. And if you yourself are looking for more personalized support in applying what you've learned today, consider joining me inside Rise, my monthly mental health membership and nervous system healing space, or apply for our one-on-one anxiety and depression coaching program, Restore. I've shared a link for more information to both in the show notes. Again, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.